You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello, and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Pete Charette, author of the newly released Discipleship, Living Out the Mandate of God. Pete was a drug dealer, drug user, and alcohol abuser who in 1998 moved to Michigan and received his master's degree in the New Testament. Welcome, Pete. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's an honor to be here.
Well, Pete, what made you decide to write a book?
That's a great question. I had spent a couple of years in pastoral ministry as a pastor of a very small church, and I was struck by the need for people to really develop some of the core fundamentals of their faith. And so I started by writing kind of what would amount to a white paper or a position paper on a plan to disciple people. Then I put that into practice by actually working with people in one-on-one settings for many years. As that developed, I extended it into about a 25-page outline of my plan to help people grow in their faith. And a little over a year ago, I sat down and decided to put pen to paper and formulate it into a book.
Was the idea a textbook for like classes you were teaching?
That played a role in it, but mostly it was the result of my experiences in actually working with people one-on-one. So there were many things that really helped people, and there were a fair amount of things that I had to kind of get rid of because they weren't as effective. And then what I've done is put that into what I call a framework or a paradigm. It's not a formula. It's not as simple as do this, and this, and you'll be successful. But it is some general guidelines on how we can be a bit more intentional about helping people deepen their faith.
So you'd been working sort of like on the outline for years as you were teaching and ministering people in churches.
Absolutely. I call this the book, I call it my 10-year labor of love.
Did your background also play a role in choosing to write a book?
Most definitely. When I was in my 20s, I was very frankly a pretty rotten human being. As you said at the beginning, I was a drug dealer, drug user, and alcohol abuser, and really had no hope, no prospects. My life was, as I like to use the word, my life was grim. And in 1993, I had an encounter with Jesus Christ. He saved me and forgave my sins. And the joy that filled my heart was indescribable. And from that moment forward, I've been living for him, and that has led me to several church experiences, which then also formed some of the foundation for the book.
Well, congratulations for having the strength to change, because that does take a lot of emotional strength, I would think.
It does. And I think that sometimes we hear stories of people coming to faith, and we think that it's all unicorns and rainbows. And with the addictions that I had, there were some very definitely some up and down times. But the end result was never in doubt. It was a steady movement of progress towards becoming who God wants me to be.
Well, great.
So then you decided to write a book on discipleship. So do you want to explain to us what discipleship means in the context of your book?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take my own personal story as kind of an example. Okay. So when I came to faith, coming to an understanding of who God is and who Jesus Christ is, that person is still not well versed in some of the fuller understandings of both who God is and what God's plan is for humanity through Christ. Discipleship is the process whereby we engage in an intentional basically a training. The word discipline is a word that means training. So we train people in the foundational elements of faith.
We've talked to other authors who, as they were writing their book, thought, there are other people who have written a book like this, or there's similar books to this. How am I going to make this book different and stand out? And what was your thinking with that? Are there other books similar to yours? And what was the process of making it unique?
Matt, that is an absolutely phenomenal question. There is absolutely no shortage of books on discipleship. They are in the Christian community. They are virtually everywhere. And that was absolutely a primary question that I needed to answer. We don't need just another book on discipleship. So I spent quite a lot of time and quite a lot of money, and I have an extensive library that I've built on books on discipleship. And I have a background also as an outside salesman. And as a salesman, you're always taught to meet the needs of the customer. Mm-hmm. So I put myself in the shoes of my audience, and based on the books that I have encountered and what I knew about current church culture, I attempted to meet a need. And that was ultimately the nuts and bolts of discipleship. And again, I hate to sound critical because that's not my point. But in the discipleship books that I have, and I have several dozen of them, I found that they were telling us what discipleship is. Well, you should teach the Bible. You should teach people how to pray. You should teach them this and teach them that. But there was nothing in those books that taught anyone how to do that. What does that look like in the day-to-day? And I always use prayer as my example. I think we assume that people know how to pray. Well, it's not the case. And there are aspects to that which can be both taught and can be developed. And so what makes discipleship, living out the mandate of God, a bit different is there is extensive material in the book on the content of discipleship. So I teach not only a disciple some of the things they need to learn, but I also teach the discipler, the person doing the discipling. I teach them how to prepare, how to be in a position where you can learn some things and then share with your disciple what you have learned. And I hope it's a blessing to people.
Well, it sounds very interesting that I like how you said you put yourself in, you looked ahead to see who would want to read this book and what can you do to make it different. I think that's very good advice.
Well, Pete, who was the audience for your book? Who did you envision reading your book as you were writing it?
And again, Matt, that's a great question because it's not as simple as pointing the book towards a specific target audience. And I had many sleepless nights thinking about having too broad an audience. Ideally, the people that I would like to see read the book would be church leaders. It doesn't have to be pastors, but there are key people in churches at a variety of different levels. And I would like to see them encounter the book and have their thinking challenged a little bit, and maybe, as is often the case when I read a book, have my eyes opened a bit, and then have them be encouraged to find somebody that may be new in the faith and work with them in a one-on-one setting to help that person develop a vibrant relationship with God.
Wow. So it seems like you really thought this out. So let's jump ahead to you wrote the book and now you need someone to look at it for editing purposes. Did you hire someone or did you use some of your friends or what did you do for editing?
I'm laughing because that was the only really dark period in the book. I have no misconceptions about my skill as an author. I clearly can write and I can fairly intelligently put phrases and concepts together, but I knew very much that the book needed editing. One of the things that we haven't talked about, I quit a 6-figure sales job to write the book.
Oh, wow.
And didn't have a ton of money saved up. And I felt very, very strongly that God was directing me to do this. So I did it. And I was cared for during the entire year that I was off, in combination of writing the book and then the beginnings of marketing it. I had not 2 nickels to rub together to spend on an editor. So when I started that process, I had no idea how much an editor cost, and that, man, they can be pricey. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I went through the book 4 times on my own, working very slowly and very diligently, and I got most of the typos and most of the unclear syntax weeded out. And then I sent the book to a couple of people to give it a once over to see if the main flow of thought made sense. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to pursue a traditional publisher.
Okay.
And if I'm fortunate enough to get a traditional publisher, perhaps they will have an editing process included, and that's what ended up by happening.
Well, great. It's good that you had those friends, because I know that I've sent emails that I read 2 or 3 times, and then I go back and read it a day later, and I think, how did I leave out a major word? Like your eyes just play tricks on you. So those friends, I'm sure, were very valuable in proofing the book.
Yeah, absolutely invaluable. They were both encouraging, and that's one of the troubles that I experienced is up until the time the book was actually published, I never really had that overarching sense that it was really good enough. And that's because everybody that I had look at it was a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that I can't trust them, but I don't know that they were close enough to me to be able to tell me that they thought this needed to be changed or this was horrible. And, the book is really good, but this chapter, looks like a 4th grader wrote it. But I've had people look at it since, and I've gotten some feedback on it, and it's been very encouraging. So I'm grateful for that.
So tell us a little bit about your publishing experience.
I very much hope that this is an encouragement to everyone that hears this, because I finished the book and very, very directly asked God, okay, you told me to write a book. I wrote a book. What do you want now? The answer came back very strong, not audible. I'm not hearing voices. I'm not there yet. But the answer was that he wanted it published. And I said, okay. So I'd never written a book before, never even considered publishing a book before. Mm-hmm. So I did what any, reasonable 56-year-old man would do, is I Googled, how do you publish a book?
Right.
Well, it took me almost a month, and I worked through probably 50 or 60 different articles, blog posts, web postings. There's an awful lot of self-publishing information that's very helpful. I was struck by the universal nature of one thing. Universally, every article said, if you're a first-time author without any type of a platform or a following, you're not going to get published.
Wow.
Again, even to this day, my book's published. I don't know how universal that is, but every article I saw said that. And I'm an ex-New Yorker, and, we've talked a bit about my background. I have a hard edge to me, and somebody telling me something can't be done is a pretty powerful motivator for me to see if something can be done.
Good challenge.
Prove them wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what I did was I put together a list of traditional Christian publishers, and some of the big ones were just out of my league, and I kind of knew the Zondervans and the big boys. I didn't have any expectation that they would even consider. But I put together a list of about 20, and only a few of them will even accept unsolicited manuscripts. So I looked down my list and prayed on it a bit and chose Crosslink Publishing. Okay. They will accept unsolicited manuscripts, and they also impressed me by in their website. They said that they'll give an answer very quickly, and that was nice for me because I didn't want to go through that. So emailed them my manuscript. They have a web portal that you fill out some basic information, and lo and behold, much to my absolute surprise, I had prepared myself for the rejection And 6 days later, they emailed me back and sent me a contract.
6 days later.
Congratulations.
Unbelievable.
I was blown away by that. But here's the thought, and this is really one thing as I've been listening to some of your interviews in preparing for this time together. This is the message that I have for anyone that might be listening. Guys, I am not a world-class author. I can write, and clearly I have a good handle on my material, but this is as simple as you need to finish the book and you need to give it a shot. And nothing can happen until you get to that point. And we don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when you finish your manuscript who's going to accept it or when it's going to be accepted. But I just want to encourage people that things that we can't even imagine happening are possible. And I just wanted that to serve as an encouragement. Work diligently on your books that you're writing. Get to the end stage and then submit it. And from that point, what happens is what's going to happen. I know that I can be self-defeating at times. Nobody's going to read my book, so I'm not going to. And I think that's very destructive.
Well, thank you for that advice. That's really well spoken and nice to hear.
Right. That was excellent advice for our listeners. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You get the contract. Is there any negotiation or anything? You sign the contract and then they agree to send it out to bookstores, print it. How did all that work?
Yeah, absolutely. There was no negotiation. I signed it and sent it back before they had time to rethink their decision. And this might be different for my situation than from some of your listeners. I read a phenomenal book on writing right before I started it, and people with much more experience and skill can certainly disagree. Stephen King wrote a book called On Writing.
Okay.
And it's a great, an interesting look at personal stories of his, and then some of the things he takes into account. He calls it the craft of writing. And throughout the whole book, one of the things that really struck me was, and it spoke to me loud and clear, was, and again, I'm not criticizing anybody that's writing with a different purpose. Sure. I don't want to communicate that. He said, if you're writing for the purpose of making money, then your writing will suffer. And that's certainly there are many authors out there that for which that doesn't apply. But for me, that really hit home. The royalties and my agreement with Crosslink was fine for me, because this wasn't a project for me where, even though I had quit a sales job and had no income, I didn't want to put the pressure on myself as I was writing. I didn't want to put the pressure on myself as I was promoting the book that I needed to, try to hawk books. Okay. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that in the least. But for me and this project, I didn't worry about that. The book is both in print and available as an e-version. It is in Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble. It's in a series of Christian bookstores as well. Great. I will tell you this, Crosslink has been just wonderful to work with. They've been patient with me, and they've really just very, very, very much helped me through the process.
Well, that's excellent to hear. It's great that it's in bookstores, in Christian bookstores. That's fantastic that you found the publisher who would do that for you, because right there is your target audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think there's enough interest in the general topic of discipleship that people may very well just pick up my book because it's on a shelf, read the back cover with my background and my story, which is a bit unique. And they may decide to pick it up. And, from there, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So can I ask you another question about publishing? What about the cover? Did you have a say in what the cover looked like? Absolutely.
What they did was they recommended for me to send some basic line art or some basic graphic design of what I had in mind for the cover.
Oh, that's nice.
And then from there, their graphic department took it and went with it. I absolutely love the cover of the book. I've already had several questions with people asking me, what is the metaphor of the iceberg and the little ship? People laugh at me. It wasn't done with that level of intentionality on my part. There are an almost innumerable number of metaphors that I can apply to it, but ultimately there is much more beneath the surface in our lives, whether it's our secular lives or our spiritual lives. There's a lot more that goes on beneath the surface than often we allow people to see. And that's the basic thought of that. But again, they did that and they did that without cost to me.
Oh, that's great. For those who haven't seen the cover of the book, it's a picture of a very large iceberg, and about 1/6 of it is above the ocean, and about 6 or 7 times of it is below the ocean, and then there's a tiny little sailboat to the left of it. And so that's what Pete's talking about, how so much of our lives is underwater, if you will, right? That people don't see, and then there's just a little bit sticking out of the ocean. So the picture is really great.
It is. And
it's nice that there was that they came up with it. They did the work, and there was you didn't have to find an artist or buy a picture.
Yeah, it was, it's just one of a number. Another thing that Crosslink did for me is they sent me a 24-week marketing class. And what it was every week I had a different task in which to engage. And it starts off with some of the very basics, get a Twitter account, get a Facebook account, add an author page to your Facebook profile. And then it went into many, many more levels of things that you can do. My sister is helping me with the marketing because since the completion of the book and the beginnings of the printing and publishing process, I have gone back to work full time.
Okay.
Just the Sabbath was over and time to get back to work. But we are emailing and following up with a phone call to media outlets and radio stations throughout the country. We're doing a direct mail campaign to churches to see if we can generate a bit of interest from a church that may be struggling in their efforts to help people grow in their faith. We're also contacting bookstores, and Crosslink really, really helped me with that by giving me some resources and some direct steps on how to do that. And I was very grateful for that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, being able to have a course that they know that things work and they're telling you what to do. And you think, oh, yeah, that's right. I should have a Facebook page. I should be able to sell the book on Facebook. So in our show notes for this episode, we'll put a link to Crosslink. Pete, is there contact information we can put on our show notes so that people can reach out and contact you?
Absolutely. The book has a website, and that is thediscipleshipmandate.com. And then my email address is the same. It's thediscipleshipmandate@gmail.com.
Great.
I would welcome any contact, any questions, anything that I might be able to do to help anyone, whether it be in a Christian context or just in a writing context. I can't imagine that I will be a ton of help in the writing process.
But you never know. You never know.
Well, if nothing else, if I can be an encouragement to somebody, that's something that I think as a writer, I know that there were many times when I would spend hours and just working diligently, and I would craft 4 or 5 or 6 paragraphs, and then I'd go to bed and I'd wake up the next morning and read them, and then I'd just highlight them and delete them because they were not what I wanted to say. Mm-hmm. And you can get discouraged. This isn't easy.
Sure.
I think people think that sitting down and writing a book's a piece of cake. Well, it isn't. It's hard work.
Right.
Well, congratulations on your book. We wish you the best of luck.
Well, I thank you very much for that. And I really just encourage anybody listening to this, enjoy the process. Enjoy the writing, the actual writing of the book. Just do what you need to do to get to the end of the process. I believe very strongly that whether my book sells lights out or whether it doesn't, at least for me, is almost immaterial. I think I read one someplace that something very, very low, like 0.75% of the people in the world ever write a book. And again, that's unverified. I mean, that could be, Wikipedia stats for all I know.
Yeah. But then you're very proud that you did this. Yeah.
But I have a very nice sense of accomplishment. When I got my author's copies of the book, to hold something like a book, it's a wonderful feeling. And I would very, very much hope that many of your listeners will be able to get that sense. It's a wonderful feeling and can't ever be taken away.
Right.
My bookshelf will always have my book on it.
Well, we hope that we can be encouragement for people too. So thank you, Pete, for giving us that nudge. Thank you.
We really enjoyed listening to Pete's story.
And his positive advice that he shared with all of us was fantastic. If you know somebody who might benefit from listening to Pete's advice, why not share the Author Inside You podcast with them? And until next time,
right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.